to episode 23 of Radio Omnicore. I'm your host, Colleen McClintock, and you're listening to the show that is guaranteed to teach you something useful and introduce you to a dynamic and interesting guest. In studio today, we welcome Neil Bierbaum. He has been a life and executive coach since 2005 and has practiced and taught meditation for more than 20 years while operating in a business context. He specialises in coaching clients towards the practical application of mindfulness for optimal performance, a result which he calls personal effectiveness. He has worked with large corporates, SMEs, entrepreneurs, and private clients, many of them looking to manage the enormous stress and increasing complexity in their work and personal lives. In 2017, Neil teamed up with clinical psychologist Dr Colinda Linde, and together they developed a program called the Practical Mindfulness Program and authored the book by the same title. So welcome, Neil. It's so wonderful to have you in the studio today to talk about your passion and my obsession, which is mindfulness. And it's just going to be an absolute privilege to pick your brain around your new book and your online program that you and Colinda Linde have put together. So why don't you start off by telling us a bit about, what brought you to this place of all places?
Thanks, Colleen, and thank you for the invitation, and it's a real honor to be here with you and, as you say, talking about this great passion. And so when you say this place, I presume you mean mindfulness and being where I am with the program. And I think, often when I'm asked that, I kind of give the short version, and I thought if I get asked today, I'll maybe give the long version if I can and try to keep it short. And which is not one that I've really shared much. And I think, it goes way back to the beginning. I was brought up in a home that was fairly religious, Christian religious, and we had these deep theological discussions and philosophical discussions. And I was a bit of a rebel, and by the time I was probably in my early teens, I had formulated my own view that if there was a truth out there, it had to be accessible to anybody across any culture, so not specific narrative that you get given or have to believe in. Also that it had to be objective, that that you could figure it out from the natural laws around you, and also that it didn't require knowledge that was acquired, say, in the year 2000. In other words, a guy 1,000 years ago should have the same access to this philosophical whatever aspect of truth. So that was kind of my premise.
When you were a teenager at that point. Yeah.
And so then I went off and lived my life, played rugby, I studied commerce and some psychology during that. And there I discovered Jung and his idea of the universal man, and Aristotle and his idea of eudaimonia, which I would translate into personal mastery. So in the business sense, Peter Senge has talked about that, about personal mastery. And so I think there was always a driver for me and trying to put these things together. Then when I was in my 20s, a friend of mine invited me to do some meditation. It was transcendental meditation at the time. And I really enjoyed that and continued practicing it. And then later on, I discovered coaching as a modality. And I was like, that's what I really want to be doing. I was a journalist at the time, and so I moved across and started training. And the specific style of coaching I trained in really applied what today is seen as some of the mindfulness principles, being aware, being non-reactive, but not just in the sense of managing stress, but also how do you apply that in your life as a whole in order to develop personal mastery. And that, for me, is what I really feel mindfulness is about. It's much broader than just de-stressing. It's a pathway to personal mastery. And during all of this, somebody else invited me to do a Vipassana meditation retreat. So Vipassana, and that's where the dots really were joined. And Vipassana is an ancient meditation. It's like thousands of years old. They say that the Buddha practiced and taught it. And funnily enough, it's what Jon Kabat-Zinn, who started mindfulness-based stress reduction, he started out with that. Daniel Goleman, the founder of emotional intelligence, he started out there. Richard Davidson, who's one of the world's leading neuroscience researchers, also started out in the early 70s practicing Vipassana. So it's really at the heart of mindfulness. And if I can just take a little bit longer to describe what Vipassana is, because that's really where it kind of answered that question I had early on, because it's not an airy-fairy meditation that's all about energy or, just chilling out. It's a hardcore process. You learn it as a 10-day silent retreat where you have no communication, no eye contact with anybody. You sit for 12 hours a day, 2 hours at a time, meditating, and after about day 4, you're not allowed to move. And that's part of the process. And what you're doing in that process is you're learning. It teaches you to objectively observe the sensations of your body and the mind's reaction to that. And so we see that, for most of us, we can't sit still for 2 minutes without reacting to some discomfort or irritation or something. Stretch that to 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes, to 2 days, 4 days, 10 days. And you see how reactive your mind is and how out of control it is. And yet we use this thing to run our life. And each day at the end of when you've done your day's meditation and, you're exhausted and energized at the same time, then you get the discourse. And that explains why you've done what you've done and how this is applied in real life. And it's about developing equanimity, being non-judgmental, being non-reactive, and how that can make a difference in your life. And that, for me, answered my question because, firstly, it was something that you can observe objectively in your own body. You can sit still and notice your own reaction to your own body. It's there. It's a very objective process. Secondly, it was available to anybody at any time. And so it really answered those kind of questions. And for me, I then saw that this is an opportunity. This is something that can be used to do what our mission statement in the Practical Mindfulness program that I've developed with Colinda is that we believe anybody can learn to manage themselves to have a different, better experience of life. And in order to do that, you need to learn and understand one thing, which is the nature of your mind and how reactive that is. And if you can observe that directly as a fact, then so many things flow from that. And so that's really how it comes together for me, and where I see the core of mindfulness is about understanding the reactivity of your mind, not just so that you can become a better corporate energizer bunny or more relaxed, but actually so that you can improve yourself as a human being and your levels of reactivity, and thereby have, a much better experience of life as a whole and become a better person through it.
Is that also a bit what you talk about, personal effectiveness, and how you then applying mindfulness in your life?
Yes, absolutely. We talk about in the program as well, we say, some of the lifestyle benefits of mindfulness is, for example, making better decisions based on what matters. So what we tend to do as human beings is we try to control factors that are beyond our control. One of the first things that I introduce is to say to people, you don't beat your own heart, breathe your own lungs, or work your spleen or other organs. If you did, you'd be dead in 5 minutes because you'd be too busy on your phone, right?
That's true.
And yet, we have this idea that we can control all kinds of things outside of ourselves. Like when you send that angry email, you think you know how the person's going to respond. They're going to come back and say, oh, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry. I'll do it exactly as you asked. That never happens. So that's just one tiny example of, maybe that what we think is going to happen or what we think is going to turn out well in the world isn't necessarily the way it is going to turn out, or that people aren't going to respond. Life isn't going to respond the way we think. And so we need to learn to become less reactive and understand what we can and can't control, where to put our attention, and thereby how to make better decisions. So that's one of the benefits or outcomes of learning mindfulness, where you learn to become more objective, more realistic about life itself, reality itself.
So it's interesting. I've been working in this field for probably 25 years, and that's around preventive wellness. And fascinating that, 25 years ago, if you spoke about this stuff, you were really seen as, it was heebie-jeebies, it was new age, definitely not something to speak about in the organization. And yet, I think it was last week I met you at Investec, and you stood up in front of this group. I don't know how many, there were 40 people, all psychologists, various professionals, and no one, and you gave your views on mindfulness and what you're doing in the organization. And it just was so accepted. It's just now become so mainstream. Some people do, I do come across people who still feel it's nonsense and it's airy-fairy. But I love just the way that you gave the story, because you use such credible science around it. And how do you experience running these workshops in high-powered organizations with these executives who are on their phone the whole time? How do you get that phone out of their hands?
Great question. And I think from your points around the acceptability, I think there is a lot of science, and maybe we can talk about it just now, some of the studies that have been done and been released recently. And, if you look at, say, cognitive behavior therapy, which is the most evidence-based of the psychological fields, it has embraced mindfulness in the last 10, 15 years and added that to its practices. And so, there's a tremendous amount of support, scientific support coming through. And always in a corporate environment, yes, landing that in the beginning, here's the science, here's the stats, kind of gets a lot more buy-in than if you just came in, wearing robes and, I don't wear robes, and trying to sell some idea. The second part for me is always getting people to experience it for themselves as quickly as possible. So, we recently did, again, for Investec, a big offsite for them. It was like 60 people, top international banking traders, whatever. And, and they were on a weekend away. So you can imagine for them, it's like party time. And we said, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to learn a little bit about your mind right now. And they loved it. The level of engagement we got was fantastic. And part of it, I would say the two things is firstly, introducing the science. And secondly, getting them to experience it for themselves. So taking them very quickly into how not present they are and where their mind is going all the time and how it's reacting, and then getting them to sit for just 2 minutes to observe their own thinking, and then coming away. And always people, so it's an exercise we have, which is, put your attention on your breath, and we let it run just for 2 minutes. And then we say to them, okay, how was that? And everybody's like, well, I couldn't stop my thinking, and, I was going all over the place. And the second thing, then I say, well, how long do you think that was? And usually they think it's like 5 or 10 minutes. And then we say, well, that was only 2. And they're like, wow, okay. And then they realize that their mind, and take them through that and say, well, that mind, which you're not able to control, is what you use to run your life. And, so it's a little bit like steering a bus full of passengers where the steering wheel's not quite connected to the wheels. And we think we're doing the steering, but actually it's just going all over. So no wonder we have reactivity and, the kinds of reactions that we have in the world out there. And if you take that, another example, like recently, there was that Johann Rupert interview on the radio, and, the level of reactivity to that, a couple of people I eventually saw try to be more balanced about, what he said and take the positive out of it. But for the most part, people just go into a reactive mode. And then what does social media do? It gives leverage to all that reactivity and then just, spirals and spirals out of control. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this polarity in the world today, because people's minds are so reactive, they don't realize it. And now social media has given us a leverage point for that. So you're seeing this rise of populism, the rise of extreme polarities between left and right. And so I really believe that mindfulness has a major role to play in getting people to, what I say, to maintain the balance of their mind. So when you hear a message like that, notice your reactivity and be able to take out what's real from the message and deal with what's real rather than going into the reactive interpretations.
And I really liked what you said in the session that you ran around being neutral to some of that stuff and not taking everything personally or creating or imagining it to be something else. So if we take it to coaching and we take it to the corporate environment, getting feedback is sometimes really difficult. And I think some of it's got to do with just not listening, not being present, taking everything so personally. How can mindfulness help in that feedback process?
Yeah, the way that we've structured the course is to try to make it very elemental. So we take out, in our first module, we have a look at we introduce what we call the 3 key elements. So there's a lot of words and language around mindfulness. And we've said, okay, the first thing, it's about being aware, which is the first step, and then being non-judgmental, and then being non-reactive. And so those are three stages, and you can even be three checkpoints. So am I aware right now of my internal thoughts and feelings, of my reactivity, of what's going on in my environment? Then can I become non-judgmental? And that's quite a big subject which needs to be unpacked a little bit. But it brings in the theme of equanimity. So realizing how, but again, we do that in a very elemental way. So we show people how we're always labeling things. So we give the example like, here's a chair, and what if I call this a dog? And then people argue about that. And we say, well, the chair doesn't change regardless of the label. Okay, they get that. Then we start talking about what are common labels that we have as people, and we start to look at the good and bad, right and wrong labels of everything, and how we apply that to every single situation, which we call our preferences or the judgments. And so being non-judgmental is about being able to be aware of your label and let go of that. So now if you come and say something to me and you give me feedback, instead of saying, well, it's bad, and then I get reactive about it, if I can recognize I'm labeling it as bad, let go of the label, and then in that space, I can become a little more objective. I can maybe see there's some truth in what you say, but maybe some of it's your stuff as well. So then I can sort my way through the argument in a more objective way, and then move to being non-reactive, which we say is defined by the element of choice. So then you have a choice how to respond. The reactive way is a knee-jerk reaction of being defensive. But a choice is to say something, say nothing. You have multiple choices of how you can respond instead of react. And so the way that we address that is to have that elemental approach of breaking it down and getting people to see like a checkpoint. Okay, I'm being judgmental. What are my labels that I need to let go of? So it becomes quite a simple process that enables people to see what stage they're at and what they're doing and let go of that.
Simple, but not easy.
Simple intellectually, cognitively, but emotionally never easy. It's really, really challenging, and that's why it's not for sissies. It's not like mindfulness is not just about chilling out. It's about really understanding that reactivity and learning to work with it.
Wow. So often we are told as coaches or working in this space that I know this stuff. This stuff is just logical and it makes sense. I've heard it. How do you build a practice? Or people say I don't have time to meditate. What is the way that people can incorporate it into their daily lives maybe?
Sure. Yeah, I think, we go very easy on the practice like we introduce people very slowly to the meditation, build up over time. We tell them, go and do this for, 3-4 times a week if you can. They come back and we can see that people struggle to fit it into their day. However, having those key elements of being aware, being non-reactive, non-judgmental, non-reactive, they do use those and they do apply them. So it's a dual process of having that elemental approach where it's broken down for them into little building blocks and they can use those as checkpoints and tools during the week. And then we encourage them, especially by mentioning the science, which the science shows that the benefits of mindfulness and meditation are very strongly correlated to the amount of time, as in hours and minutes, that you spend actually sitting and meditating. And we can maybe talk about that shortly. But then in terms of a general practice, so the one thing we talk about is learning to be present and learning to be non-judgmental. So a very good practice would be, say, when you are at work or driving home, try to be a little bit like a detective who's investigating a crime scene. So, by the time you get home, usually what happens is you've been running those arguments in your head that you have at work. How are you going to win this argument? You're thinking about the deadlines at the end of the month, about something that happened in the past. And you get home, you couldn't tell what songs played on the radio. You couldn't tell which lights were red and green or what else. You don't notice your environment because you're just on autopilot. So it's about being able to report. If there was somebody asking you when you get home to write a report on your journey, would you be able to do that? Would you be able to tell where you parked your car or left your keys without, because you were present at the time, without having to go and search for them the next morning? That would be a good starting point because it's teaching you to become present. And then there's a nice one that I like to do with music. So when you get a little bit better at that, start to pay attention to the music that plays say on the radio or on your stereo in the car on the way home, and see if you can, without losing your presence of the road, of course, pay attention to the music and be present to that without getting lost in your thoughts. So, and see if you can get to all the way listening to an entire song without losing focus. The next level would be to choose an instrument within the music, and that is, let's say, a bass line or a vocal line. And probably you're not going to do this while you're driving, but maybe when you're sitting at home, and try to see if you can go all the way through listening to that single instrument and follow its line all the way through the song. So that starts to hone your attention. But now that's teaching presence. The next level is to be non-judgmental. So then you take your music and you put it on random play. So say you've got iTunes and you choose songs, not albums. You go to songs and you put it on random play. And then whatever comes up, you listen to it. So if it's a song you like, you don't play it again. And if it's a song you don't like, you don't skip it. You just play it through. Now this teaches you the next level, which is being non-judgmental. And it helps you to see what high levels of irritability you have when things are not going your way, like, I don't like the song, I want to skip it, and you go mad. And then when there's a song you do like, you crave it, you want it back. And that little action of the mind, that being judgmental, that chasing after what we want and running away from what we don't want, is one of the core sources of suffering in our life. So you can use that as a very simple method to develop what we call equanimity, or being non-judgmental, as well as presence. And then from there, start to see how you can apply that in other areas of your life. So, when the neighbor arrives home and always hoots, I have this problem at home, to notify someone that they're there and all their guests do it. So you're always having this hooting outside. You learn to not get so reactive and go out there and throw a bucket of paint on their car, but rather, make a polite request. So that's where you learn some of the application of that, or you recognize the application of the practice of being non-judgmental, non-reactive. But the training, so using music like that is a very good training. There's other practices as well that you can use where people think with meditation that they need to set up a shrine and it needs to be all silent and quiet. What we teach is, you can meditate on the noise in a place. So if you sit, for example, and the other day I was doing it at the gym, or sometimes on my way to my clients, if I'm early, I sit in the parking lot. And there's cars and hooters and the loud air conditioning in the underground parking. And you make that the focus of your meditation. And what you can notice when you do that is, if you say you're sitting in a room and you start meditating, now a dog barks. What your mind does is it starts to imagine the dog. It imagines the source of the sound. So now you're in thought or imagination. And very soon that thing will spark another thought, a memory or something. And now your mind is starting to travel into the past or off into the future. And then it's about liking what you have a memory of a dog, and then suddenly you're sad because your dog died. And then you remember a holiday. And then it's like, oh, we've got the holiday to plan at the end of the year, and your mind's gone. So always become aware of that imagination starting up and the journey that your thoughts, and bring your mind back just to the sound itself without labeling it. Recognize the sound and see if you can separate out the sound from the imagination that is associated with the sound. So that's developing the awareness of labeling. And then the second part is to get is the judging of the sound. So now I think, well, I'm meditating, it should be quiet. And if you can give up that judgment of it and just make it part of your meditation environment. When we started this program, we were doing it at a health center in Blegauri, and they had construction going on. So it was wonderful because we had noise all the time. We meditate on the noise. and then, and there you start to learn that you can tolerate these things in your environment, and it becomes part of your environment. And then you can have choice around that kind of thing.
So how is it different to repressing frustration? So your neighbor. At some point, maybe you're just going to really lose it. The difference between dealing with this tolerance and not just repressing.
Sure. I think that's where, when you do Vipassana, you learn what I call a constant reset. So definitely this is not about suppressing. It's about a full acknowledgement of, I'm angry, This is irritating. It's like full honesty with myself. I may choose to be honest with somebody else, like my partner. This really annoys me. I may choose to be honest with them as well and go to them and say, listen, but I would do it in a way that is, that isn't reactive, where now instead of having the conversation, I'll go and throw paint, go and do some crazy act in order to get revenge. That part I can manage myself and see, well, that wouldn't be constructive. I can simply have a conversation and either accept the answer that I get and live with it, rather than having to act that out. And that's where the longer term meditation, so I'll go back to the science, what they discovered. Can I jump
You may. You may.
So Daniel Goleman, coined the term emotional intelligence, and Richard Davidson, who's one of the leading neuroscience researchers, they came out with a book in 2017 called The Science of Meditation, and they gathered all the studies that have been done on meditation, 6,800 odd studies that have been done since the 70s when they started out, when no one wanted to touch it because it was post-Timothy Leary and all that stuff.
Right.
But since then, and they evaluated them for their scientific rigor. And they then looked for what they called the trait effect versus the state effect. And so they said the state effect is, say you've meditated for 10, 20 minutes, you'll feel calm afterwards, you'll feel more present, less reactive. But if you go out in the traffic or you go home to that noisy neighbor, within an hour you're going to be reactive again. So they said that state effect can be achieved through many things: yoga, baking a cake, whatever else you might want to do, Pilates, as well as meditation. What they were interested in is, how do you develop those lasting traits, such as the monks who've meditated for half a lifetime come away claiming to have this equanimity and compassion and all these supposedly desirable traits. So they said, is that possible? Is it true? And they found that there was a lot of evidence in support of that, specifically though for long-term meditators. So people who spent, I went to a meditation retreat 10 years ago, so I've been meditating for 10 years. The question is, did you sit for all the hours in between and accumulative hours? So they studied guys who've done like 9,000, 11,000 hours of meditation through a lifetime. And they found that those guys had stronger connectivity, and this is actual, neurological measures of the physical brain structure, stronger connectivity between the amygdala, which causes that reactivity, and the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function, the decision-making function. So they found that those guys were far less reactive if they were given, a task to focus on something, and they were given stresses or distractors or things like that. They were able to maintain their focus and attention, as well as their heart rate and physiological state for much longer and under much more pressure than non-meditators. And the reason for that is because of what I call a constant reset. So if you imagine you try and sit still for 10 minutes and you feel a bit of a discomfort, you're going to move to scratch that itch or rearrange yourself. If you can move your attention away from that thing and put your attention somewhere else, it'll kind of disappear. Eventually your attention comes back and it might be there. Eventually it will go away. And that teaches you to be less reactive, but for a tiny thing like an itch. Now go and sit on the floor cross-legged for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes without moving when, your legs get sore or, the sweat starts dripping down you or you get a bit cold or whatever it happens to be. And you do that once, twice, fine. But now you're doing it the 7th time, the 10th time, the 20th time. You're just letting go and bringing yourself back to being still, not reacting. You can imagine at a very deep level what that does in your brain to be able to reset again and again. Because usually what happens with the noisy neighbor is you manage yourself once, you manage yourself twice, you manage yourself 3 times, and the 4th time you go, and now you've got a story to justify your action. But actually all you did was you lost your cool a bit later than you might have. So a real deep practice of mindfulness, and particularly a good mindfulness meditation like that, will teach you to almost be able to do an infinite reset, where no matter how far someone pushes you, you just go, you know what, it's not going to get to me.
It's like a superpower.
Yeah. And so I think that's what the sort of message and what I feel passionate about is that possibility. People don't realize it. They think, it's just, time to chill and bring you into present. That's very good and it's effective and it's a huge start. But the real power of this is immense. And in our programs, if I can carry on with that, is I always give this example, and it's in our mindfulness, it's in the book and on our workshop as well. I said, mindfulness is not for sissies. And I talk about a year that I had back in 2013 where kind of everything fell apart for me. And, my ex-wife told me, first my mother got ill and died. A business collapsed that I was heavily invested in. Relationship ended. My ex-wife came and said she wanted to emigrate with my son, etc., etc. And I literally got to the end of the year living on in a spare room in a friend's house where I grew up. And it was the mindfulness practice that enabled me to get through that. Without that, I would have become extremely reactive, angry with the world, despondent, full of despair, whatever. It could have led to all kinds of things. But I was able to just bring myself back and not be reactive, remain calm, present, and see the opportunities in the situation and get through that.
Sure. And
it did really require that infinite, amount of resets to be able to get through that year and that situation as it was. So it's not the possibilities that are available are not trivial.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Neil. It's quite a lot that you've shared, and I think people relate to the openness and the vulnerability that you share because, in all the clients that we're seeing on a daily basis, people are going through a lot of pain. There's a lot of suffering, and I think mindfulness is, potentially a way that people can manage that somehow.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure if I've got the exact article in my mind, but there was an article that was written recently. It was a Harvard article around mindfulness is bad. Did you see that article? And I think the gist of it is saying now mindfulness is just good for everything. How do we use it with caution and not sort of prescribe it in place of real interventions that need to happen?
Yeah. I didn't see the Harvard one, but I've seen some in The Guardian and a couple of others as well. And there's various different claims that people have made. One of the things that we say in our program and in the book is that mindfulness is not a silver bullet, it's the salt in the mix. And I think what we mean by that is that people are always looking for systems and answers. So now it's about just be chilled and nothing matters. No, we're not saying that. We seem to have this binary way of thinking in this, where it's either this or that. It's either, people are meat eaters and then they discover veganism and suddenly they're off on that tangent, or they're allopathic medicine or homeopathic. And surely we can maintain the balance of our mind and look at what's objective and real in every situation and treat the situation as it is. So similarly with mindfulness, it's not to now suddenly say, well, I'm chilled and, nothing matters. And it's not. It adds another dimension. So we say you still have your goals, but you also realize that they might turn out very differently, and that's okay. You don't have to start freaking out when things aren't going your way, and now you start applying pressure against life, and life is just saying no. You have to find that dance between making happen and letting happen. And so mindfulness enables you to do that. A good analogy for me is like a tree. A tree stands for hundreds of years. It's very strong. But part of its strength is that it can flex in the wind. It knows when to flex. If it didn't, then it would just snap under pressure. They build skyscrapers with flexible steel. Same thing, so yet we in our lives become very rigid. We either know mindfulness is irrelevant and I'm, use force and will to get what I want, or we go the other extreme now. Mindfulness is the only thing, and I apply it to everything, and I become chilled like a hippie, and and then I get nowhere. So neither one, and people look for systems like that. They want to say, oh, so now I don't have to think for myself. I don't have to use discernment. I just take on this and I go and live that way. It's never the case. So, we're very clear about pointing that out. You now have this extra awareness, this extra possibility for how to respond in a situation that's giving you choice, but you still have to use discernment. You still have to assess the situation and make choices and deal with the reality. It's not an escape. And so, so that would be my response to that statement.
So how do you keep your own practice going? I know you said we could talk a bit more about it, but how do you manage your work-life balance or integration? What is it that you do?
I think on work-life balance, there's two things for me. The one is around values. So I say to people when it comes to work-life balance, don't drive yourself mad. I'm more about clarity of values. So in other words, if Nelson Mandela had been striving for work-life balance, he wouldn't have taken the chances because he wouldn't have dared spend time away from his family, because then it would upset his work-life balance chart, and then we wouldn't have had him, So he was clear on his values and he lived them. And I think the important thing is we all have certain things that are important to us, and we need to establish harmony with ourselves about that. So this is what's important to me, and harmony with our environment. So if I'm in a marriage or a work partnership, I need to get people to understand what's important for me, and I must still, like that tree, be flexible around that. But it's not about now trying to say, well, everything's got to be equal. Then there's some things that are less important to us. So for some people, exercise is less important, or for some people, socializing is less important. Instead of trying to force that into being the most important thing in your life or equal with whatever else matters to you, I say just don't neglect it. So because if you neglect it, it eventually becomes the only thing that matters. If you neglect your health when you're sick, the only thing that matters is getting better. If you neglect finance when you've got no money, the only thing that matters is getting some. So, keep it on the field of play, but don't drive yourself mad trying to create this perfect balance. Be clear on your values and work out between yourself and whoever is important in your life what your different values are, and learn to harmonize around those. So if career is important for me and socializing is important for my partner or spouse, then we need to respect that about each other and not try and force our values on the other, and also then make whatever compromises are reasonable. So I'd say that's like the one part of it. So for me, for me it's around spiritual wisdom, vocation, career, health, and fitness. Those are my priorities. I'd say, like socializing is kind of lowered down, so I don't socialize that much, but I do try to keep, make a reasonable effort. You might see me on Facebook a few times a year.
No, I won't. I just deleted Facebook long ago. Yeah.
Good. But then I think the other question around work-life balance that comes up for me is that people are really struggling with the demands placed on them by the corporate world. And like I do quite a lot of work in the banks with coaching, and sometimes I see my clients' diaries and I'm just like, when do you guys do any work? Because it's just meetings. You want a meeting, it's like in 2-3 weeks' time I've got a gap here. And so any talk of work-life balance is almost hypothetical when it comes to those kind of situations. And there, I think, if you want, what we're doing is, so there's a great saying by Eckhart Tolle. He says, if you want to achieve your goal more than you want to be doing what you're doing, you experience stress. And I think the whole corporate world is about goal chasing in service of shareholder value. And we've completely lost the experience of why people go to work. So we talk about the triple bottom line, sustainability and people. But do we really care about that experience? No, we care about shareholder value. And therefore we become, driven insanely to achieve that. And people who became engineers or bankers or whatever they chose to do because they loved it are now not loving it because they're just on a treadmill. And so I think if you want to achieve work-life balance, you have to argue for sanity in the organization and the triple bottom line, that work becomes about values other than just shareholder value. And again, that's not to say now it doesn't matter and we, shareholder value is one element, but let's not forget about our experience of life, because we're spending most of our life at work. And, so the thing of trying to extract more and more value out of fewer and fewer people. And, I think we need to find another way of dealing with that.
I'm sure you've come across the TED Talk by Nigel Marsh, and he speaks about work-life integration. And he says that to have a meaningful conversation about this, we need to be honest about that. Certain career choices are just not going to be possible to have work-life integration. And that is, these corporates that you talk about. And even if they try hard by putting in the nursery schools or the places for them to look after their kids on the property. That just makes people stay at work longer. So while people are trying to make these strides in organizations, ultimately we have to be responsible for our own balance, I guess, and our own values, like you've said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think for me it's, there's a certain lifestyle. So for me it's and it's not always possible. Sometimes, you go through phases in life where there's things and you just have to spend, maybe it's a couple of years just working your backside off to get somewhere. However, when you can, it's about, putting the lifestyle first. So for me, I say this is the level of intensity I want to work at. I like work. I work really hard, but I'm not going to drive myself mad. And so I strive to kind of keep it in that balance. And if it means, I'm going to earn less, I'll accept that. What it does do also is it forces creativity, because now I've got to find a way to, say, leverage my income, for example, through an online medium or something, rather than through my time. So, by setting yourself some parameters around, say, this is a lifestyle that I'm prepared to live and that I want to live, it forces you to really ask the question, well, how am I going to achieve that? And then to become creative. And if that becomes your objective, to strive for that, you might achieve it to some degree. Sometimes you'll be forced to work a little bit harder than you'd like, as long as it's, but for a short period. And other times you might kind of drop below that. But I would approach it like that, like define the lifestyle first and then figure out how.
Well, it's interesting. Let's talk about your online program, because it seems a bit like a mindfulness program online. How's it going? Who are your sort of target audience? There's so many resources now available for free online. So how do you compete with those?
Yeah. So, we started with the program just one day, decided, let's put out our idea of what mindfulness should be. And we started inviting people, and we just had an amazing response. We've had probably more than 300 people through the program in the last 18 months. And, and we just kept adding, we were giving them notes, and then they said, well, don't you have a book? So we wrote a book. And then we realized, the logistics of putting together a course and, and getting people there and so on. And I've always been interested in, was a journalist, and I've maintained my interest in online media and so on. So I just naturally started putting it together. We decided, let's record this material, let's put it online. And so it's evolved organically. And what we've done is we've recorded it in a way that it can be white labeled. So you can drop in, for example, if you wanted a corporate branding. So it's video, audio, and readings in a various combination across all 6 modules. And then, if, say, a corporate wants to white label it as their own, we can just drop in those backgrounds and they can run it like that. So that's really where we want to go with it, because we've recognized the major trend for corporate learning is online. And for this as well, we see it as a global program, and that, we want to take it globally, and that online is really the platform for that. And the difference between this and the apps is that, our first module is the introduction to the essentials of presence and mindfulness. And then we start to take it much further than that. So the modules 2 to 5, which are all as well chapters in the book, is around firstly applying mindfulness to emotion regulation. And this uses a major CBT technique as well as a coaching technique that then enables you to see, what do I need to be aware of? How do I become non-judgmental with regards to emotions and the things causing emotions? And then what does non-reactivity look like? In other words, exercising choice with how I'm going to respond when I'm feeling emotional. So that's a module on its own. Then we take it from there into dealing with stress. And again, we bring in some coaching and CBT stuff around that. And Colinda did a whole thesis on that, so we drop some of that in there too. But then we take it beyond that into decision making. Because one of the key things around, in the modern world is that in the old days we had reference points. If you were brought up in a certain culture, you were a certain gender, your life path was fairly narrowly defined. You'd be an engineer or an accountant, or and that was it. Whereas now it's so wide open. It's kind of every man for himself in every situation. So you've got to really be able to understand your own values and maintain the balance of your mind when making decisions. So we do a whole module on that. What do you need to be aware of? What do you need to be non-judgmental about? For example, values, what people think of your values, what you think of others' values, your decision-making style, etc. and then leading into being non-reactive when making decisions. So you don't just make the same knee-jerk decision in the same situation throughout your life with different content, but you start to make decisions based on what's real and what matters in every situation. And then each one builds on the next. So the next one then we do is about creating and sustaining the state of flow. So we bring in all the science of research about flow, and it dovetails perfectly with being aware, being non-judgmental, being non-reactive. So we show how you can apply that to all areas of your life and any activity in your life, and that's tremendously motivating. And then from there we go into authenticity in relationships, showing the link between presence and authenticity, and being non-judgmental and authenticity, and so on. So that's our point of difference.
There's a big mashup of modalities
is the application, and you can see on the book it's called, under Practical Mindfulness, Master Yourself, Master Your Life. So it's about taking those mindfulness principles and applying them in a way that really makes a difference to the way that you manage yourself and therefore your experience of life. It's not just a de-stressing tool or that's part of the journey, but it's much more than that. So that's our point of difference. And I think it's still very affordable. The modules for the public, it's like 350 Rand a module, and then there'll be a package rate. So 3 of the modules are online at the moment. The others will be up in the next probably 6 weeks or so.
Great.
And so that's how, and I think it works nicely with the doing the online. Then you can have the book as a backup that you can refer to, and of course then we'll probably start putting in webinars and allow people to apply for coaching or one-on-one
or
coaching
forums
sessions or something like
that. Yeah. So that sounds like a nice thing for organizations to do when you mention they can actually create it as their own program. To bring it into the organization. What other things can organizations do to encourage mindfulness?
I think creating, as you showed me earlier, a space where people can practice that, making it available for people to attend and start to experience it, without it having to be forced on people or created as, but just making it available, I think would be, and for the right reasons. Not because we just want to keep you here for longer or make you work harder, but genuinely making it part of a development program. And I really believe, as I've said, it's about taking it from wellness and putting it into, even in the OD and personal development space, the leadership development space. Because, when people can learn to become non-judgmental, non-reactive, develop equanimity, there's a tremendous impact for leadership. In fact, the term equanimity, I've done some research on it. And
it's an unusual term, actually. Yeah.
And it's really one of the key things around in Vipassana. You learn anicca. You hear it hundreds of times during anicca, which is as it is. And then, so you observe the sensation as it is, not reacting to it, but just as it is. And you notice that things come and go. They're neutral. All things come and go, and that pain and pleasure or just sensations, it's your reaction to them that causes the problem. And so then I did some research and I found that actually equanimity was, from the time of the Stoics, it was there. It's not the thing itself, but your relationship to the thing that matters.
Tim Ferriss loves the Stoicism. Do you listen to Tim Ferriss's podcasts?
No. I've read some of his books.
His podcast is amazing.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll take a listen. And then in all the religious traditions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, all the way through, equanimity has been one of the main desirable traits. Eckhart Tolle talks about it, and yet it's almost completely missing from our leadership lexicon. And I found it in 2 places. Peter Senge talked about it. He said people high in personal mastery treats reality as an ally, not an enemy. That's kind of the closest to seeing that equanimity. Instead of trying to drive things to submit to your will, it's about working with things as they are. And then there's a book by a guy, Debashis Chatterjee, called Leading Consciously, and he says equanimity gives the mind purity of perception, I think it's clarity of vision, and effective decision-making capacity. And really, equanimity is about giving up your preferences or your judgments about what's good or bad in a situation, right and wrong, liking or not liking things, and instead allowing things to be as they are. And our big cognitive mistake is, as I said earlier, that we control things, that by my decisions, or if I want something to go this way, then it must go that way. And yet we can very often make decisions that don't turn out so well. And then we think, well, if we do nothing, then nothing's going to happen. But actually, life evolves on its own anyway. So situations very often take care of themselves, and I need to decide which one needs my attention. I also, as a leader, can become less recriminating, if that's a word, when things don't work out. Like say, I often get this. People say, well, we had this problem, and why should I have had to notice it? Someone else he should have got it. And I say to them, you know what? The fact is, it surfaced in time and you caught it. It doesn't matter how it surfaced. Yes, sometimes you need to check, we should put processes in place. But sometimes stuff emerges despite the process or outside of the process. Someone else catches it. And then we go into this big reaction like, it shouldn't have happened, and we're blaming and everybody gets upset. But actually, if you deal with it, what's real, you go, oh, look, it happened. We caught it just in time. Great. Let's move on. So that is an example of how equanimity, mindfulness can help leaders develop a better leadership style. And why I'm saying, I think it has applications beyond the wellness area and really into leadership development.
You must be a cool leader to work for.
I don't know. I don't know if I should let you ask people. They might say something.
So you speak a lot about, Eckhart Tolle, you're talking about John Kabat-Zinn, all these people. Who's your mentor? Who's the person that you've got, the book? Who's the person that really speaks to your modality?
I would say, so firstly, Krishnamurti, who was kind of regarded as the guru's guru, and I've got a book of his, sayings and a number of his books, and he really was able to take the intellectual concepts out of a thing and look at it as it really is. And so I really like his stuff. But I would say, Eckhart Tolle. So years ago, I got his book, A New Earth. First, I got a weekend workshop that he did, and I do a lot of that random listening on iTunes that I talk about, and I put stuff on, and I just let it play. And I've got a lot of audio stuff like Tony Robbins and James Hollis and Eckhart Tolle and a bunch of these guys. So it's nice because it weaves in and out of the music. And I've been listening to that other one. It's called Through the Open Door, as well as A New Earth, probably for 10 years. And each time I listen to it, it just kind of tunes me a little bit better to what he's saying. And I must say, there's not one thing that he says that I find is off the mark. He really, really nails it. And he's got one statement that sums it up. He says, the only true spiritual practice is to surrender the next moment. And what he means by that is to give up your preferences for what you say should be happening right now or in the next moment, which is perfect equanimity, being non-judgmental. And when you do that, no matter what situation you're in, like when I was in that situation I described a few years ago, you surrender your preferences. Like, why should it be any other way? It's only me saying so, and you find this incredible peace and also this incredible clarity and creativity that emerges in any situation. And so, so I've found that to be tremendously accurate and really on the mark in terms of his understanding and application of equanimity in particular.
So where's next for Neil? I mean, you want to get your online program going, and I think what's so nice about that is the impact that it can have, rather than just how many workshops you can run. Yes. So that's exciting, because I think you've really got a very different slant on this whole conversation. You can see that it's just deeper for you than just the normal fluff. What's on the horizon for you?
Well, I think I'm doing some work with clients in Canada and looking to do some work in the States as well, and as well as here, hopefully getting this program into some corporates and doing some workshops and around that, so that they can do the online program, and then we can have a workshop session where people can ask their questions and do that. And just really spreading the word of this, that about mindfulness, linking it to personal mastery and leadership rather than just the wellness aspect. And then from a writing point of view, I've always wanted to write an allegorical novel, And so I've been reading a couple of those to get the style right, and I'm busy trying to craft something on that. So I'm hoping that in the next year I can put something like that out.
Wow, that's you've said it now. We're going to be looking for it.
Check on me in a year's time.
We will, definitely. Well, I think at Omnicore, as we spoke earlier, we encourage mindfulness. We've, incorporated a quiet room into our space. And I think we would really love to look at, your program and seeing how we can augment that, because when we do our practice every week, it's just really a guided meditation. No one's really learning more about mindfulness. So it will be lovely to extend that offering to our staff.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to be part of something like that.
Yeah, good. Well, it was so lovely to talk to you and really, this is just my WhatsApp group. I love all of this discussion, and I just feel I've sort of seen a different perspective to it, and hopefully we can have you and Colinda at some point.
Great, yeah, that'll be excellent.
She really has a lot to bring to the work, and especially with anxiety and the stuff that she achieves there is incredible.
Yes. Yeah.
And we just wish you everything of the best with your online program and your book, and certainly we'll be sharing this and putting all your recommendations in the show notes.
Great.
And thank you so much.
Okay. Excellent.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you.
The path to personal mastery requires that we can stand comfortably within ourselves and be present, non-judgmentally. This is a lifelong journey. Neil has linked some very helpful resources in the show notes, so check them out. And his session has really given us a lot to think about and apply in our lives. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and comment. Check out our website www.omnicore.co.za for our blog and our previous episodes. And thank you again to William Uren, our producer.